All right, let's get right into it. When you hear about conflict in the Middle East, specifically the Strait of Hormuz, your mind probably jumps straight to oil, right? Tankers, gas prices, that kind of thing. But what if I told you the biggest threat from a crisis there isn't about what powers our cars, but what grows our food? So, yeah, that's the big question we're tackling. How can one single flashpoint in one narrow stretch of water ripple outwards and put an additional 45 million people at risk of going hungry? The answer, it turns out, pulls back the curtain on a hidden fragility in the systems we all take for granted. You know, while all the news headlines are screaming about oil and gas, the Strait of Hormuz is actually a critical choke point for something far more fundamental. This is a story about the very foundation of our global food system. And here is the big twist. The main threat to global stability from this conflict isn't really about oil. It's about fertilizer. And let me tell you, without a steady supply of fertilizer, our entire modern agricultural system pretty much grinds to a halt. And this is where it gets kind of crazy. Just look at the sheer scale of this region's dominance. The nations in the Gulf are, for all intents and purposes, a fertilizer superpower. They control a third, 34% of the global trade in urea, a key ingredient for growing our food. This incredible concentration, well, that's the crack in the foundation. So what a crisis like this does is it puts something called food system resilience to the ultimate test. It's about how well our food system can take a punch. And this situation reveals what you could call a massive single point of failure. It's like having the entire internet run through one single cable. If that cable gets cut, you're in big trouble. To really get our heads around how this unfolds, we can't look at it as just one problem. Think of it more like three distinct shockwaves, one hitting right after the other, and each one makes the next one even worse. Let's break them down. All right, wave one. This one's the most direct, the most obvious. It's the physical cascade. This is the simple, brutal reality of fertilizer not being able to get from the producers in the Gulf to the farmers around the world who desperately need it. And you can see the chain reaction right here. The strait closes, boom. Global fertilizer supply could get slashed by a third. So what happens? Farmers can't get it, so they have to use less. And when they use less, crop yields plummet. The end result is a real physical shortage of food that could last a year, maybe even 18 months. And that's a problem you can't just throw money at. And we're not talking about a small dip here. I mean, listen to this quote from the CEO of one of the biggest fertilizer companies on the planet. He's saying that for some crops, yields could be cut in half. Just, wow. Cut in half. That is a catastrophic loss of food. Okay, so that's the physical shock. But then comes wave two, the economic cascade. Because this isn't just about whether the food exists, it's about what it costs. This conflict basically lights a fire under the price of everything in the food supply chain. Just look at these numbers. Urea prices jump 44%. Oil shoots past $100 a barrel. Now, you have to remember that higher energy cost acts like a multiplier. It makes everything more expensive, producing the fertilizer, running the farm equipment, and trucking the food from the farm to your plate. And then we get to wave three. And honestly, this one might be the most dangerous of all. It's the behavioral amplifier. This is where human psychology, our fear, and our politics takes an already bad situation and makes it catastrophically worse. This feedback loop is just incredibly destructive. It starts with uncertainty, which quickly turns into what analysts call sovereign panic. Countries freak out. They slap on export bans to hoard their own supplies. And what do you think happens next? The countries that need to import food start panic buying, grabbing whatever they can. And suddenly, prices are going through the roof, way beyond what the actual shortage would justify. It's a total collapse of confidence. Okay, so we've got these three waves, physical, economic, and behavioral, all crashing down. The big question is, who gets hit the hardest? Where is this choke point going to cause the most pain? If you look here, you can see two continents are really on the front lines, but for slightly different reasons. Over in Asia, you've got massive importers like India and millions of small farmers who are extremely sensitive to these costs. For them, even a small price jump can be devastating. Then you look at Africa, and the problem just gets compounded. The region imports over 90% of its fertilizer, and when households are already spending up to 60% of their income just on food, there's simply no wiggle room. Any price spike is a disaster. But the risk doesn't stop there. It ripples out everywhere. Take Latin America. A country like Brazil is a global food superpower, right? but it imports 85% of its fertilizer. A crisis for them becomes a crisis for everyone who buys their food. And in the Middle East itself, there's this fascinating concept at play, the virtual water crisis. Think about it. When you import food, you're also importing all the water it took to grow that food. So when those food imports get cut off, it's not just a food crisis, it's a food and water crisis, all at once. So we've talked about the mechanics, the shockwaves, the economics, but what does this all actually mean in the end? What's the real human cost of all these cascading failures? Because the numbers, they're just gut-wrenching. 45 million. That's the number. The World Food Program projects that 45 million additional people could be pushed into acute food insecurity. Just let that sink in for a second. That's more than the entire population of a country like Argentina or Spain. It's just staggering. And if we break that number down, you can really see where the pain is concentrated. East and Southern Africa are bearing the heaviest burden, with nearly 18 million people at risk. But look around the rest of the table. West and Central Africa, Asia. The truth is, no region is truly spared. The ripple effects are global. So, okay, that's the problem. And it is a huge one. So, what's the solution? How do we move from just reacting to a crisis to actually building a future that's more resilient to these kinds of shocks? Well, the immediate, obvious fixes, they're just not going to cut it. I mean, sure, we can try to reroute ships or find other suppliers. We can tap into strategic grain reserves. But the reality is, other ports get overwhelmed. They just can't handle the traffic. Moving this stuff overland is painfully slow and super expensive. And those reserves? Best case, they'll last you maybe 4 to 6 months. These are all just Band-Aids on a much bigger wound. No, real long-term resilience requires a plan that works on every level, like what's outlined here. Globally, it means financing food imports for the hardest-hit countries. Regionally, it means neighbors working together, sharing reserves, maybe even building their own production capacity. And nationally, it means diversifying where you get your fertilizer from and curbing panic. You have to tackle it from all angles at once. So when you boil it all down, what this whole situation really exposes is a massive, fundamental weakness in our modern world, a single point of failure. We've allowed a resource as absolutely critical as fertilizer to become dangerously concentrated in one of the most volatile regions on Earth. And that leaves us with one final, crucial question to think about. This crisis shows that a disruption thousands of miles away can directly impact the food on the shelves right where you live. In a world this interconnected, is any nation's food supply ever truly independent? That's something we all need to consider.